you can see the helicopter. The helicopter right here is just a bunch of shapes, just ideating things that came to mind with gray. There were fogs when I went to college. There's the fog of war. Hey, my name's Nathan Goodrow. I have a new comic called Hometown Hero at the Offing magazine that I want to show you. And I want to walk you through how I started from it to made it all the way until publication. You can see it right here. It is a vertical comic that is called Hometown Hero. It's about this young boy that goes through his life in military service. I want to talk about the art style first. Most of the way this was done is in a very particular style that a guy named Scott Flanders coined. It's called shape carving. And so what I did, if you look down here at this 3 panels, each of these are very hard edges with different gradations, different colors. You can see the helicopter. The helicopter right here is just a bunch of shapes cut out again and again. There's no gradients. There's no lines even. It's just a bunch of shapes put on top of each other. Similarly, you see the guys walking through here. They are each going to be their own little shape, and you have the trees cut out as well. One reason for this was because of time. I was under a pretty quick turnaround to get this done, and instead of having to deal with a lot of painting and making it painterly, what I did primarily was I would use this tool up here, this selector, and I can make a shape, and inside that I could drop a color fill. So every time I made something, I could deselect it, and I can move on and add something else to it, perhaps something like that. So all of the style of this whole comic is in this very shape carving way. It's meant to be blocky, very clear silhouettes. It's also meant for me to have very compelling panels that can be read quickly. I wanted this to be something where you could see his eyes, and you can see I didn't go for the most realistic looking eyes. These are giant and they're like diamonds, but I wanted them to be something that when I drew them out, it would be the center of the panel. Another thing that I really focused on was black and white. I really wanted to do a black and white comic, but I didn't want to just do black and white. I wanted to have this sort of gradation. And most of this comic does not exist in pure black and white, except for things in the beginning and the end. You see this first mural that our character's looking at. Each of this is only black and white. There's no gray. And then as it kind of goes, there's more and more tones of gray until the very end. You can see the water guns that the kids have and the insignia on his hat. These are the things that are going to be black and white. And lastly, it is a vertical comic. It is from top to bottom one giant rectangle. You can see almost no panels are next to each other, except you have a few in between that are the threes. And then from there, it's mainly single panel, single panel, single panel. The main reason for this is because I wanted to have it read primarily on the phone. If this was going to be printed out, it's going to be a different experience having a 2-page spread in front of you. And so what I did is I made it so when you're scrolling, you're going to see a few of the panels at a time. You're going to be taking them one at a time. And so it's just trying to be cognizant of the way that my reader is going to read this is not going to be the traditional comic book, where it's going to be left, right, top to bottom. They're going to be on their phone, normally vertical mode. And so they'll have a very narrow window, but a very long window. So I wanted to give them times to see panels in relation to each other. I wanted to have multiple panels at a time, so that way they can see, especially the jump cuts. I wanted them to have both of those together. So I made it one long vertical strip. So how did I do this? How did I go about it? Well, it all started with the sketchbook and writing out some ideas. You can see here I have, I knew I wanted it to be a gray comic, and so I started thinking what were black and white and gray things. I started with some wedding ideas, and I started just ideating things that came to mind with gray. There were fogs when I went to college. There's the fog of war. There's some tombstone sketch right here. Best man, the bride and groom. So I had all these kind of ideas, and I was just kind of playing around. I drew this, which really made its way into the final piece, pretty much. And so I liked that, so I kind of kept playing with that. I had even an idea of something kind of comical. I had a middle school band called Shades of Gray, So I almost did something on that. And then I just sort of played around with what ended up becoming the final comic. You see just my very loose sketches. Those are about an inch by 2 inches, and they go down. They're not very clear, and if I don't know what I'm writing, I'll just put the words next to it. And so I'm playing around. Something here, I'm not convinced here. I'm not convinced after doing one small page that there's something here. I have a note that says more gray as time goes on. And so I just keep experimenting, keep exploring. So I say, well, how does the story end? Because this gets us to about the midway point in the final piece. And so I have a lot of explorations. I have things that didn't make it in. I have a lot of older pieces of him, and this one doesn't even have a face. And it ends here with the kids. It's not exactly how it does in the comic, but you can see I have these faces. And I'm like thinking in words as well as pictures. Even my ideation's happening in this vertical format, like the final piece. And then I want to look up some other things. I want to look up what flamethrowers look like standing, how helmets sit on their head, how would they hold it? If I wanted to draw women and children, what would that look like? So I did a lot of exploratory sketches, and then I went back to a fresh piece of paper. I took a whole 8.5 by 11 and I cut it in half and I taped it together. So I have this nice long, almost simulated thing of what you'd see on the screen. When people are going to read it, they're going to swipe up like this. So I want to mimic what my digital canvas was going to be like. And you can see I followed the sketches pretty closely. We start with the mural the boy sees. They end up being a little more inspired by real propaganda posters from World War I based on these hats, and we slowly zoom out. And this is just done in red colored pencil. It's done in red colored pencil just to sketch, to feel light and loose and have no pressure. From there, I went on to my iPad and I started playing around. I didn't scan these in. I could have, but I wasn't committed to any of this. And I start color blocking. I start looking for pieces and I think, oh, well, I'm going to do a hat. So I take my little selection tool and I try to figure out how these hats are going to look. And just like that, you can see it starts to come together piece by piece by piece, and until the very last step, which is cleaning up the borders, giving it nice gutters. That's the pieces that happen in between here. And the most important thing for me in this piece was something called match cuts. These two right here are supposed to be a match cut. They are taking two moments and transporting you and linking them together. So right here we have a village on fire, and then that same outline, that same shell that went into the village, I'm going to use for the houses. You can see right there. When you look here, I tried to make, if you look at the silhouettes of each of these houses, they should match up. The good thing about working digitally is you're able to have a very close replica because you can work off literally the other one. I could take this image, copy it down, lower the transparency, and I'm able to play around with it. I wanted to show a passage of time and almost like an echo between parts of the story. The whole story centers around this young man who at the very beginning is enamored by this hall. He's got a sense of awe and wonder. He has a sense of shock and awe and can't believe it, and almost a feeling of regret at the very end. You have these three moments that hopefully line up and give the reader a sense of beginning, middle, and end of before innocence, kind of the loss of innocence, and sort of that like, what do we do without that? And so all of this goes in to one comic. It gets packaged off. I send it to lovely people at the offing. My editor Katrina picked it up, and I want to thank them for having it on their site. I hope you go read it and make your own comic.